This is our lecture on Chapter 9, which is part of our Unit 4 on energy use and metabolism and use. And we just finished photosynthesis, and now we're going to take a look at cellular respiration. So if we look at the two together, we can see how energy flows through an ecosystem. We have sunlight entering our system and then being used by a producer in order to generate oxygen and organic molecules. And then those organic molecules will be used by other organisms, which are our consumers, who will use the energy stored in those organic molecules along with the oxygen produced by the producers in cellular respiration. And this is all done on the cellular level. Cells use the chemical energy that's stored in the organic molecules in order to generate ATP, which is how all work within cells and within a living organism is going to occur. So we'll look at, first of all, how carbon cycles through an ecosystem here.
Could a carbon atom that was once part of Albert Einstein be in you? All living things need to take in carbon-containing molecules to fuel their activity and build their cells. This is true for busy students and for all organisms. Let's look at how carbon atoms move through the carbon cycle in the Arctic tundra. Carbon atoms from carbon dioxide are incorporated into living things by producers, such as this plant. Carbon dioxide enters a leaf, moves into a cell, and goes into a chloroplast. There, in the process of photosynthesis, carbon dioxide is used to make sugar molecules. The sugars can be used to build larger carbon-containing molecules, carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. In this way, carbon that was in the air is now part of the plant. When a plant is eaten by an herbivore, or primary consumer, carbon in plant tissue enters the primary consumer's digestive system. There, plant molecules are broken down. These small molecules are then used by the primary consumer to make larger molecules for building its own tissues. In this way, some of the carbon that was in a plant becomes carbon in a primary consumer. Similarly, when a primary consumer is eaten by a higher-level consumer, some of the carbon in the primary consumer is incorporated into the higher-level consumer. Carbon-containing molecules in dead plant material, animal feces, and dead organisms are taken up by decomposers, such as fungi and bacteria. Decomposers break down these materials and incorporate some of the carbon atoms into their own bodies. We have now seen how carbon moves from carbon dioxide to producers, to primary consumers, to higher-level consumers, and to decomposers. How does carbon get back to the atmosphere? During cellular respiration, carbon-containing molecules are broken down, and ATP is made. Carbon dioxide is released as a byproduct and returned to the atmosphere by producers, consumers, and decomposers. Overall, this return of carbon dioxide by cellular respiration is closely balanced by its removal from the atmosphere through photosynthesis. The global carbon cycle involves living things on land and in rivers, lakes, and oceans. And, by the way, considering the huge number of carbon atoms in each person and how quickly carbon atoms move through the carbon cycle, there is almost certainly a little of Einstein in each of us.
So we're going to take a look at cellular respiration, and so we're going to be looking only at that part of the carbon cycle where we are breaking apart organic molecules in order to release the stored energy. So again, a reminder, catabolic means to break apart. And when we break down these organic molecules, we have an exergonic reaction occurring. And when we're looking at cellular respiration, it's going to include both aerobic and anaerobic respiration. So when we have the presence of oxygen, we have aerobic respiration used to break down or have the catabolic reactions that are going to break down the organic molecules to produce or synthesize ATP. When we have fermentation, we also can get some ATP, but it's only going to be a partial degradation of the sugar molecule. And again, that's going to happen without any oxygen. We also can have anaerobic respiration, which also can occur without the presence of oxygen. And it's similar, though, to aerobic respiration. What is going to be different is that other compounds besides oxygen are used to drive the production and synthesis of ATP. So we'll look at each of these things in a lot more detail in the lecture ahead. So this is a reminder again that cellular respiration is going to be able to include both aerobic with oxygen and anaerobic without oxygen respiration. But usually when we're talking about cellular respiration, usually what people are thinking about is the part with oxygen, so the aerobic part. The other thing that we commonly think of when we're talking about cellular respiration is that we're just breaking down a sugar molecule. But in reality, carbohydrates, fats, and proteins can all be used as fuel. But for the purposes of just studying the process of cellular respiration, we're going to focus simply on the breakdown of a glucose molecule using the formula that everyone is familiar with. Here, the C6H12O6 glucose, combining with 6 oxygen molecules to produce 6 carbon dioxide molecules and 6 water molecules, as well as energy in the form of ATP and heat. This is a picture showing the parts of cellular respiration that we're going to be looking at also. And you can see here our starting product being glucose. And we're not really showing in this diagram where oxygen is going to enter the picture, but I can tell you, give a sneak peek of what's ahead, that it's actually going to be used at the very end in oxidative phosphorylation. And the carbon dioxide is going to be used throughout the process as well as water. So we'll look at those more carefully and see exactly where those come out. But the carbon dioxide actually is going to come out of the Krebs cycle, and water is going to come out of oxidative phosphorylation. So those are where those products occur. ATP is going to actually become available and synthesized in each step, each of these 3 different parts of cellular respiration. And of course, heat is going to be a product whenever we have catabolic reactions occurring. Before we go any further in looking at cellular respiration, we should look at the structure in which it occurs. So that's the mitochondria in a eukaryotic cell. And the mitochondria, as a reminder, is a double membraned organelle located in the cytoplasm of the cell. And a cell often will have a number of mitochondria, so the very simplistic view of just one cell, one mitochondria is just that. It's very simplistic. Mitochondria are going to be present in relation to how much energy each cell needs to produce. So, for example, a muscle cell is going to have a lot of mitochondria because it has to produce a lot of energy, as opposed to an epithelial cell, which isn't going to maybe have as much cellular processing going on a moment-by-moment basis. Looking at that double membrane, you should be aware that there's a smooth outer membrane And then the inner membrane is actually a highly folded structure that we call the cristae. And thinking back to when we were looking at surface area versus volume, you can see how having all these folds greatly increases the surface area that's available in this inner membrane. And that's going to be important as we see what part of cellular respiration is going to occur within that membrane. In between the two membranes, so between that outer and inner membrane, we have what's called the intermembrane space, which is fluid filled, and again is going to play a role in cellular respiration. And then the last part we have is also within the cristae, there's an open space called the matrix. It also is fluid filled, but it is the site of some parts of cellular respiration that we'll be identifying later on. If you'll remember, we have the theory, the endosymbiotic theory, that mitochondria were actually once living prokaryotic, perhaps, cells that were engulfed and later made a part of eukaryotic cells. So as once independent living cells, they do have that double membrane. They also have their own DNA. They go through their own reproductive cycle, so they actually divide by binary fission, similar to a bacteria. And they have their own enzymes and their own ribosomes. Another thing we need to review is the definition of a redox reaction, because that's a big part of how cellular respiration occurs. So a redox reaction is any chemical reaction that transfers electrons between the reactants. In oxidation, we have a substance losing electrons. We say that it's oxidized. And in reduction, we have a substance gain electrons, or the substance is reduced. This gaining and losing of electrons, we saw in photosynthesis how that plays a part in the electron transport chain. In cellular respiration, it's also going to play a part in releasing energy that can be ultimately used to synthesize new ATP for the cell to use. This is an example of a basic formula for a redox reaction, where one part of the reactant becomes oxidized and the other part becomes reduced. So one part is giving up its electrons and the other is gaining electrons. In this case, we have the loss, and here we have the gain. So with our example down below, you can see how sodium becomes oxidized by losing its electrons, and chlorine becomes reduced by gaining that electron from sodium. The electron donor is called the reducing agent, and the electron receptor or acceptor is called the oxidizing agent. This is another example showing just those definitions. And you can pause this and study this so that you can review and remember which is which and what is oxidation and what is reduction. But I'm going to move on and look at the reaction in cellular respiration and how that reflects a redox reaction. So in this case, what we're looking at is the oxidation of a glucose molecule. And so what it's doing through a series of reactions is gradually giving up its electrons. And then the substance that's going to be accepting those electrons is our oxygen. So oxygen is what is becoming reduced, and the product that is the result of that is going to be water. Cellular respiration, it can be broken into 3 separate stages. There's glycolysis, there's the Krebs cycle or the citric acid cycle, And then the last is the oxidative phosphorylation. In each of those,